Really happy to welcome Brian, you here from the Public Council, a grantee of the foundation. We're going to spend some time talking about really important reports that you've been a leader in publishing that highlight and address some of the inequities of our regional centers here in the state and talk about some of the challenges ahead. And I just want to say, as a pediatrician who makes referrals to the regional centers almost every week for early start services for my families, um, this issue is so important to me. A lot of my families have a lot of challenges of accessing services. And I've been just a huge fan of your reports and I feel a little bit like I'm meeting a rock star here. And so I'm excited to dig in and talk more about these with you.
Well, Dr. Pedres, thank you so much. It's nice to meet you too. I'm very honored to participate in this.
So let's dig in. I know I have a lot of personal experiences with families navigating these, but I'd love to hear a little bit more from your side, as your work has really shown the deep inequities, both ethnically and racially, around funding. Can you give us an example of what does this mean for families and that you see?
For some families, everything. Regional center is the only support system that some families have. We have families that are first generation, just trying to set up a life here, and they don't have any family support anywhere else, and they're completely dependent and reliant upon the regional center to not only provide them with the critical therapies and supports directly, but also to show them the way and to help guide them in order to access critical services from other agencies.
I understand you've been interviewing some families as well as part of this work. Can you share any stories that really stuck with you about that impact of these inequities for that family?
Oh yes, there's many stories out there, and but there is a common theme that they're frustrated. They're frustrated by the disinformation, the bureaucracy, the barriers, the maltreatment, the stigma, the bias. I spoke with a family recently who explained all the concerns that she was having with her toddler child, her infant. He was crying all the time. He was very active at night. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't speaking. He was having behavioral issues. She explained all her concerns to the service coordinator with the regional center, and nothing was offered. The regional center didn't initiate anything. Finally, the family was able to get an outside agency. The agency said, oh my goodness, we have to provide intensive speech therapy for this child 3 times a week, starting as soon as possible. And so the regional center picked it up. But by then, that child only had a couple more months to go in early start before he
That's
was.
right.
Yeah,
And then the problem gets passed over to the school district via an IEP. So, and the cycle continues.
correct.
And I'm sure we're going to continue to learn more and more about some of the frustrations and maybe deeper inequities. Sort of taking on a more positive light to this. As a committee member and in general public, it's been just fantastic to read these reports. They've been so important, and especially many of the recommendations that come at the end about what we can do to address them. I was wondering if you could just look back on the last few reports and talk about some of the success stories or things where we've seen progress as.
There's been more of a focus now on service access and equity, and the notion that if we just educate these families through outreach and information, which is important, but if we just do that, then they'll be able to overcome these barriers. What about removing the barriers themselves in the first place? So for instance, regional centers have to provide informational packets about how their process works when the families come into the system. They have to post on their websites the criteria and tools that the regional centers utilize to assess for how much respite you can get, or whether you can get a particular therapy or not. We have implicit bias training that regional centers now have to undertake. Regional centers have to develop language access service plans so that they can deliver services, and those services can be provided, meaningfully provided. So we're very encouraged, but there's so much more work to be done.
That's fantastic. I understand now that you're doing some work actively in partnership with one of our state senators, Melissa Hurtado, and working on introducing a new bill to address some of these inequities. Maybe can you share a little bit more about that partnership and that work?
So this is SB 1092. And what this really seeks to do is to make what is presently an unfair fair hearing system a fair hearing system. The rules for appealing a dispute with the regional center are very legalistic, formalistic, and antiquated. These laws were enacted back in the 70s and 80s, and it was a different paradigm back then. Our state has become so much more diverse now, and the system really doesn't work for the way our society is now reflected. We've heard countless stories of families that have gone to hearings. They've tried to bring family support into that hearing, only to have their support system be turned away. They've had interpreters at the hearing during a hearing who are not conveying accurately what the families are trying to explain to the judges and to the regional centers. There's just the idea that this is the way you have to resolve any dispute with the regional center. You have to go through this formal procedure. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to deconstruct that legal framework to make it more user-friendly.
Anything we can do to lower the bar to make this more consumer-friendly appeal process is just sounds so important, as that's a really intimidating process for, I imagine, any family, and particularly those with language barriers, cultural barriers, and others trying to navigate the system. So thank you for that really important work. And clearly, speaking of the work ahead, despite lots of progress, the inequities are still very, very palpable and present. The work's not done, clearly. I'd love to hear just a little bit of your thoughts on what's to come here in next from your work in public counsel.
We really need to have the full legislature, the Senate and the Assembly, sit down jointly to have another oversight hearing over regional center funding disparities in the state. There have been a lot of changes in the law, but the needle hasn't moved. 10 years ago, there was a task force that was assembled by the Senate to look at this issue, and I was a member of that task force. We proposed over 50 recommendations in a report that we issued in 2013, and only some of those have been acted upon. So it really is time to revisit this holistically. And some of the other issues that are coming to light, the concern, I should say, of how the regional centers are even classifying families on the basis of race and ethnicity. We have the main 4 groups of ethnicity, which is white, Latino, African American, and Asian. But startlingly, we really are beginning to see this emergence at a much greater rate of families that are being classified as other ethnicity. Are they multiracial, or is their race ethnicity unknown? They're the ones that are suffering the most in terms of disparities at this point. And so the state has to get a handle on this burgeoning population that is now experiencing inequity in anonymity.
Well, I for one, am really looking forward to this upcoming report, which I think is coming out soon. Just want to take a moment again to say thank you, Brian, for your work, your leadership here. Regional centers are just a pillar for children with special healthcare needs in terms of accessing services. And as a pediatrician who cares so deeply about school readiness, the early start programs and early start supports that are also anchored within our regional centers are really critical to that. So I appreciate the passion, the leadership, and the systems change that I know you're working towards.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pedres. I'm really grateful to the foundation, to the Packer Foundation, for enabling me to undertake these studies and to issue these reports. And I do believe they are having a meaningful impact. They are resonating with the decision makers.
Really nice to talk with you, Brian. Look forward to more work together.
Yes, you too. Thank you again.